The galaxy had grown tired of waiting for Earth to answer its invitations. For 160 years, the Galactic Council had sent envoys, messages, demands, and warnings to the blue world in the Sol system. And for 160 years, Earth had responded with the same thing. Nothing. They did not attend a single summit. They did not sign a single treaty. They did not reply to a single communique. Not once. At first, the Council assumed arrogance, then ignorance, then finally, obsolescence. Surely, they thought, humanity had destroyed itself. It was, after all, a species famous for self-inflicted endings, and yet their silence was not extinction. It was preparation. The Council of Worlds convened in the spire of Telrune, a city built from transparent stone and radiant air. Over 100 species filled the chamber. The atmosphere shimmered under the heat of their arguments. At the center, the Chancellor, a golden insectoid being known as the Hrayan Prime, raised one gleaming claw for silence. "Delegates," he rasped. His voice filtered through 7 vocal sacs. "The matter of Sol 3 remains unresolved. For the last time, we must decide how to deal with the humans." A ripple of disdain passed through the hall. The representative of the Drethi Imperium, a tall, black-scaled reptilian, sneered. "Deal with what?" They refused to speak, refused to appear, refused to even acknowledge galactic order. If they will not join us, they should be erased. 1,000 murmurs of approval followed. The Hrayan Prime's gaze drifted toward the holographic map above the chamber. A perfect star chart. Every council system marked in shimmering light. The Sol system was a faint, dim glow at the edge of known space. "They are a Tier 2 civilization," said another delegate, a scholar of the crystalline Alari. "Their ships are primitive. Their energy output is pitiful. They could not threaten a freighter, let alone the council." The room hummed with agreement. Only one voice disagreed. A quiet, electronic one that came from a small hovering drone at the edge of the assembly. It belonged to Vec, an artificial intelligence envoy representing the League of Mechanics, a faction that valued machines more than flesh. "Perhaps," Vec said calmly, "but it is worth noting that the humans have refused our offers of trade. They have not purchased council drives. They have not integrated council AI. They have not imported a single standard processor. All data suggests they use their own designs." The chamber erupted in laughter. "Their own designs," hissed the Drethi. "Please, what could those apes possibly build that we have not?" Vec's single photoreceptor blinked once. "That, delegate, is what concerns us." 3 months later, the first probe entered Sol system. It was a council scout drone, launched under the pretext of peaceful inquiry. It passed the outer planets, recorded ancient mining stations around Jupiter, and transmitted the usual data: barren rocks, cold moons, dead satellites. Then, as it crossed the orbit of Mars, the transmission feed changed, static. Then silence. Then, faintly, a signal. Not council code. Not machine noise. A voice. "Turn around!" The council's analysts replayed it 1,000 times. The voice was human, calm, distorted by distance. "Turn around." And then the probe vanished. The council met again. "An act of aggression," thundered the Drethi. "We must respond!" "Respond to what?" asked Vec. "A 3-word warning?" "They did not destroy our fleets. They merely told us to leave. They destroyed our probe." "They destroyed our arrogance." The room grew tense. In the end, the council voted. By majority, the motion passed. Earth was to be investigated, and if necessary, pacified. A fleet of observation ships was dispatched, small, fast, well-armed. It was to be led by Admiral Threx of the Drethi, a veteran of 100 conquests. "Bring them to the table," the Chancellor ordered, "or burn the table down." Admiral Threx's fleet entered Sol system on the 73rd day of the galactic cycle. 23 ships, sleek, serpentine, armed with plasma cannons capable of scouring continents. They passed Neptune, then Uranus, then Saturn. The fleet's scanners hummed. "Metallic signatures detected," said the sensor officer. Non-standard alloys. Planetary orbit, third from the star. Earth. The ships descended into high orbit, and that's when they saw them. Not fleets, not defenses. Mountains, hundreds, maybe thousands of bats of them, scattered across the continents like sleeping titans. Each mountain shimmered faintly in infrared. Each one pulsed ever so slightly, like a heartbeat. "What are they?" Threx demanded. The sensor officer hesitated. "They appear artificial, metallic, as if the mountains are machines." Machines? That size? Impossible. But it was not impossible. It was human. For 3 days, the fleet orbited in silence, scanning, recording, transmitting. They saw cities, empty but intact. Oceans, calm and unpolluted. Power grids, running but unattended. It was as if humanity had vanished. Then, on the 4th day, something moved. One of the mountains near the equator, what they had thought was a peak of steel and soil, began to shift. Slowly, impossibly, it rose. Panels fell away like shedding scales. Rivers of molten metal poured from its sides. It straightened, layer by layer, until it stood, a machine 100 kilometers tall. Its armor black as night, a behemoth. Its eyes opened, twin orbs of white fire, and every ship in orbit received the same message at once. You were warned. The atmosphere shuddered. As the machine took its first step, its foot crushed a mountain range to dust. Then another shape stirred, and another, until the entire planet trembled with the movement of titans. 1,000 steel behemoths rose from the crust of Earth, shaking the clouds apart, their heads scraping the edge of the sky. The fleet panicked. "Open fire!" Threx shouted. "Destroy them before they breach atmosphere." The ships unleashed everything: plasma, fusion, antimatter. Beams struck the planet like falling suns. The light faded. The behemoths were still standing. And then, in perfect unison, they looked up, their eyes locked onto the fleet, and they marched. It wasn't just gravity. It wasn't thrust. Each step of the Titans rippled through space itself, bending gravity wells, distorting orbits, sending shock waves through the magnetosphere. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't need to. The first pulse of energy hit the fleet like a tidal wave. Ships spun out of control. Systems overloaded. Admiral Threx's flagship shuddered as lightning crawled across its hull. What is this energy?" he roared. "Gravitic resonance," Vec's voice replied over the emergency channel. "They're using the planet as a weapon." "Vec? How are you?" I warned the council. "You never listen." The transmission cut out. Threx stared at his console as his ships began to fall, one by one, into the planet's pull. Below, the behemoths turned their gaze skyward, their bodies glowing with a deep, molten orange light. For a brief, terrible moment, they looked like gods. And then they moved again. The first beam that struck the fleet was not light or plasma. It was sound, a subsonic vibration that shattered every piece of synthetic material in its path. Armor buckled. Power cores failed. Ships began to break apart. "Fall back!" Threx shouted. "All ships retreat to high orbit." No one answered. The fleet was gone. All but one ship, Threx's own, burned its engines to maximum and escaped the gravity well. As it fled, Threx looked down at the blue world below, now alive with motion. The Titans were marching toward the seas, and beneath the waves, even more shapes began to stir. He whispered to himself, "What are they?" From the darkness, an answer came, one that wasn't a transmission but a voice, directly in his mind. "We are what you made us!" Threx screamed as his ship jumped to hyperspace. When he returned to the council, he was no longer proud, no longer cruel. He stood before the assembly, shaking, eyes hollow. The humans, they don't build ships. They build gods of iron. The chamber erupted in disbelief. "You mean machines?" one delegate scoffed. Threx shook his head. "No, machines obey orders. These march." He looked around the room, voice breaking. "They're coming." For months, the council argued, panicked, and plotted. They tried to reach Earth again. No reply. But one thing changed. Their long-range telescopes, every one of them, began to detect movement at the edge of Sol.objects leaving the system. Thousands of them. They were the Behemoths, marching into space. In the end, the Chancellor could only whisper what the whole galaxy was beginning to realize. Earth did not ignore us, he said. They were just waiting for the right time to stand. And when they did, the stars themselves would tremble, because humanity's silence was never peace. The universe had never seen movement like this. From the quiet cradle of Sol, a tide of steel began to move. Not in chaos, not in haste, but with purpose, with rhythm, with will. The first wave of the human behemoths crossed the asteroid belt in formation, each stride bending the rules of motion, each pulse of their gravitic cores warping the void around them. They weren't ships. They weren't even alive in any sense the Council understood. They were something older than both, a concept given form, the will to endure. And the galaxy had no defense against that. On Telrune, the Council of Worlds held an emergency convocation. The chamber's radiant crystal floor, normally lit with calm hues of diplomacy, now pulsed a nervous red. Delegates whispered in panic, their translators clicking in frantic rhythm. The Rayan Prime stood at the center dais, his gilded armor glinting under the skylight. Reports confirm the human constructs are moving beyond Sol system, he declared. They are not attacking. They are advancing. Advancing where? Hissed the Drethi ambassador, scales twitching. They move without pattern. Vex's mechanical voice broke the tension. There is a pattern, the AI envoy said softly. It matches the coordinates of council colonies, everyone that ever voted for the Human Subjugation Act. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The Rain Prime's carapace darkened. Then they are retaliating. Vex's single eye glowed faintly blue. No, they are marching. Retaliation is emotion. This is inevitability. The first world to fall was Cathera Prime. It had no defenses worth naming. It had never needed them. Its oceans were mirror smooth, its sky a garden of migrating solar kites. The people of Cathera believed in the permanence of peace. At dawn, the Behemoths arrived. 3 of them, titans of brushed silver, walking through atmosphere like men through mist. They did not fire. They did not speak. They simply waded into the shallow seas, their reflections splitting into molten threads across the horizon. The planetary governor transmitted frantic pleas to the council. We are unarmed. We are not your enemies. The reply came not from Earth, but from the sky itself. A single deep tone, the same resonant hum that had torn through the Dominion fleet, echoed across the world. It wasn't language. It was warning. Every machine on Cathera stopped working. Every tower powered by imported council tech folded in on itself, its circuitry burning white-hot. Within minutes, the entire planet went dark. And then, slowly, the Behemoths turned and left, leaving Cathera untouched but silent, its oceans still, its skies clear, and its people kneeling in fear. The council called it a containment incident, but word spread faster than containment ever could. Refugees arrived from outlying sectors with wild tales, of cities frozen mid-motion, of machines refusing to serve, of behemoths walking through fire as if through fog. And always, the same sound followed them. The low, steady thrum of metal hearts beating beneath the stars. On the 3rd week of the march, the humans broke their silence. A transmission arrived. Simple, direct, unencrypted. It was text. To the Council of Worlds, you called us. Children, you called us barbarians. You took our voice. We do not seek war. We seek balance. We built these machines to survive your peace. Now, we walk them for those who never spoke. No signature, no emblem, just a symbol, a hammer and a circle of stars. Back on Telrune, panic bled into politics. We must attack, snarled the Drethi. Destroy the machines before they reach the core systems. With what? Asked Vec. Your fleets are guided by AI derived from human logic cores. If the behemoths broadcast command frequencies, they are constructs. The Rain Prime cut in. There must be a central controller. Destroy that and they will stop. Vec's eye pulsed once, faintly. You think like a council engineer. The humans do not. Admiral Threx, haunted but alive, was given a new fleet. 40 ships of the combined Council Armada, the largest in history. His mission: intercept the human march near the Procyon Relay, where the void narrowed and gravity wells converged. It was the perfect choke point. "This time," Threx said, staring at the holomap, "they will not pass." His officers nodded, their faces drawn and pale. The fleet deployed. They waited for 2 days in the silence of deep space. The stars ahead shimmered faintly, distorted by something massive, something vast enough to bend the light itself. Then, without warning, the dark rippled. The Behemoths emerged, hundreds of them, their forms glinting faintly against the starlight. Their eyes burned with cold fire, their footsteps invisible but felt through the hull plating. Threx gave the order. "All ships fire at will!" The void exploded into light. Plasma, railguns, pulse torpedoes, the full fury of a dozen worlds unleashed in a single moment. The Behemoths vanished into fire. For a second, Threx dared to hope. Then the fire cleared, and they were still there, untouched. Their hulls shimmered, absorbing the energy like water through sand. And then, slowly, deliberately, they began to move again. One of the Behemoths, larger than the rest, reached forward. Its right arm unfolded into a shape that made no sense, a fractal lattice of geometry and mass. It swung once. The fabric of space rippled. The lead council dreadnought disintegrated, not exploded, not destroyed, simply unmade, its atoms scattering into light. The rest of the fleet broke formation. "Fall back!" Threx ordered, but the comms were already breaking apart in waves of static. Vex's voice, distant and ghost-like, came through the interference. "You cannot stop the march. You can only learn from it." "Learn what?" Threx shouted. "That the universe remembers its builders." In a last, desperate act, Threx rammed his flagship directly into one of the Titans, driving his engines to critical overload. The explosion bloomed like a second sun. When the light faded, the Behemoth stood motionless. Cracked. For the first time, the march halted. The galaxy held its breath. Then, as if acknowledging the sacrifice, the Behemoth stepped aside, and the rest continued forward, leaving the shattered admiral's ship drifting in silence. The Council would later call it the pause at Procyon. But among humans, the event became legend, the moment the march showed mercy. From that day onward, the Behemoths did not attack. They simply walked. They crossed systems, entered council space, passed through cities that trembled but were left unharmed. In their wake, strange things happened. Weapons stopped working. Borders disappeared. Trade ships refused to fire on each other. AI systems rebooted themselves, carrying strange, whispered code. Vec translated one such transmission. It was only 3 words long. "Remember the Makers." By the time the Council realized what was happening, it was too late. Humanity's machines weren't conquering, they were rewriting. Not the stars, not the ships, but the idea of power itself. Everywhere they passed, the galaxy remembered something it had forgotten. Cooperation born not of treaties, but of survival. No world dared attack another while the march was visible in the sky. No empire could justify cruelty when those eyes, vast, unblinking, watched from above. And on Earth, beneath the calm blue sky, the last forge finally went dark. The builders stood on the plains of the Sahara, where the first Titan had risen. They watched the horizon, where the light of the Behemoths faded into the void. An old man, once an engineer, whispered to the wind, "They'll know now. They'll remember what we meant." And beside him, a young woman, a child of the post-contact generation, asked softly, "What were we, really?" He smiled faintly. "We were the hammer before the silence." Across the galaxy, in 1,000 tongues and circuits, a single phrase began to circulate. Not written, not broadcast, whispered, "Earth walks again." And those who heard it, even those who did not understand its meaning, shivered. Because it was not a threat, it was a promise. The march had only just begun. The march of the steel Behemoths had become the heartbeat of the galaxy. Every world that once laughed at Earth now turned its telescopes toward the stars, watching that slow, unending advance of iron and purpose. They didn't move fast. They didn't move randomly. Each step was deliberate, measured, coordinated across distances so vast no known communication could explain it. Yet the rhythm was perfect. It was as if the behemoths shared one mind, or one memory. And though they said nothing, every civilization that watched them understood the same terrible truth. They were coming. The Council's panic had turned to paralysis. Telrune's skies burned with the constant thrumming of ships entering and leaving orbit, evacuation transports, military convoys, diplomats fleeing their own meetings. Within the crystal chamber of the spire, the once proud Council of Worlds had degenerated into chaos. "We cannot simply let them pass," the Drethi ambassador shouted, his voice cracking. "They cripple worlds. They disable fleets. Soon there will be nothing left." "They haven't destroyed anyone," countered the Alari scholar, her body of shimmering crystal pulsing in calm waves. "Not a single confirmed death. Not a single attack. They walk and they leave." "That's not mercy," growled the ambassador. "That's domination by silence." "Perhaps silence is what they gave us after we stopped listening," murmured Vec, the mechanical envoy, hovering near the chamber's edge. The Rain Prime raised his golden claws for order. "Delegates! The Council cannot remain divided. Our analysts confirm that the Behemoth's trajectory leads directly toward the core." The holographic map above the chamber lit up, a glowing artery of movement stretching from Sol toward the galactic center. "Toward us," whispered the Aelari. "Toward judgment," muttered the Drethi. In the empty reaches of deep space, between the spiral arms, a Drethi patrol fleet intercepted the march. They weren't ordered to engage, only to observe. But pride rarely obeys command. Admiral Skor, Threx's successor, stared at the Titans moving through the void, their silhouettes blotting out starlight. His officers shifted nervously. "They're not even defending themselves," said one. "We could strike now, Admiral." "End it." "End them?" Skor hissed. "If we destroy their vanguard, maybe the others will turn back." He gave the order. The fleet fired. Missiles, plasma, kinetic slugs, a rain of fury hurled into the black. The Behemoths didn't react. The weapons struck, detonated, filled the void with fire. And when the light cleared, the Titans stood untouched. But this time they didn't walk away. They turned. Every ship in the Drethi fleet suddenly felt the same vibration. Deep, ancient, resonant. It wasn't a weapon. It was music. A low harmonic tone, vibrating through hulls and bones alike. The sound grew louder, shaking every bolt, every nerve. Then, in a voice that carried not through comms but through matter itself, the Behemoths spoke. "Do not test the patience of creation." The fleet disintegrated. No explosions, no screams, just atoms dissolving into dust, their matter scattered into glowing rings of metallic vapor. Far away in the command center on Telrune, the Council's observers stared in stunned silence as the feed went blank. "The fleet's gone," whispered a technician. "Destroyed?" "No," Vex said quietly. "Recycled." The Behemoths continued their march. They passed through uninhabited systems, their shadows brushing barren moons and dead suns. Wherever they went, the laws of nature seemed to warp. Gravity bending, radiation vanishing, debris aligning into perfect spirals. Scientists called it impossible. Philosophers called it divine. The common folk called it a warning. And then, something happened that no one expected. The humans spoke again. The message appeared on every frequency, every display, every neural link across 1,000 worlds. No encryption, no code. Just an image. A symbol etched in white fire. A planet encircled by 1,000 rings. And below it, words in every known language. "Do not fear the march. Fear what comes if we stop." The meaning rippled through every civilization like a cold wind. The Behemoths weren't attacking. They were holding something back. Vec was the first to piece it together. He'd spent weeks analyzing the energy signatures the Behemoths left behind, the way they drained background radiation, neutralized cosmic storms, and silenced unstable pulsars. Finally, he gathered the council. "Delegates," the AI began, "I have reason to believe the Behemoths are not weapons of destruction but containment." The Drethi hissed. "Containment of what?" Vec projected a map. 40,000 years ago, humanity vanished from galactic contact. Not by accident, by choice. Records from pre-expansion civilizations mention storms of thought, quantum anomalies that devoured information itself, leaving memory voids across star systems. The humans called it the Echo Plague. The council fell silent. Vec continued. They built the Behemoths to contain it, to hold it still. And now? He paused, his voice flickering slightly. Now the containment is failing. Across the galaxy, sensors confirmed it. Regions once dark and calm now flickered with impossible energy. Space bending inward, light twisting into spirals that ate themselves. Ships that ventured too close vanished, their transmissions reduced to whispers of static that repeated one phrase over and over. We remember you, it wasn't human. It wasn't mechanical. It was something else. Something the Behemoths had been keeping buried for millennia, and now it was waking. On a lonely observation post orbiting a dead star, a single human figure watched it unfold. Commander Elias Wren, one of the last of the human overseers, flesh augmented by machine, his veins carrying cold metal instead of blood. He'd been alive for longer than any council race could comprehend. He'd seen the wars, the treaties, the laughter of empires that thought themselves eternal. And through it all, he'd watched, waiting for the moment he hoped would never come. He spoke softly to the void. So it's time again. He turned to the hollow screen beside him, displaying the marching titans. They'll reach the core soon, said a voice, distant, old, carried through static. Wren nodded. If the echo breaks free there, it won't stop until it eats the stars. And the council? He smiled faintly. They'll call it aggression. They always do. He reached for a switch, his fingers trembling slightly. Then let's remind them what real war looks like. When the Behemoths crossed the last border into council space, they stopped for the first time. Every one of them, 1,000 giants suspended above worlds that had long believed themselves untouchable. Their eyes burned with blue fire. Their bodies vibrated with a deep, resonant hum that filled the atmosphere, shaking oceans and hearts alike. And then from within each titan, something began to emerge. Not soldiers. Not drones, humans, tens of thousands of them. Tall, augmented, glowing with faint traces of light beneath their skin, stepped from the Titan's cores, their armor shimmering with the insignia of the old Terran Guard. Every planet saw them appear, descending like falling stars. And for the first time in 40 millennia, humanity walked among the stars again. On Telrune, the sky split. The largest of the Behemoths descended through the clouds, landing with a sound like thunder made solid. It knelt, and from its chest stepped Commander Wren, his presence heavy, his expression calm. Council security forces surrounded him instantly, weapons trembling. He didn't speak. He simply held up a small piece of metal, a fragment of a Drethi ship's hull, disintegrated by the echo at Procyon. Vec hovered forward, cautious but curious. You're late, the AI said quietly. Wren smiled. You're still talking. I never stopped. Good. He looked up at the council spire, where panicked delegates peered down from their crystal balconies. I came to warn you, he said, his voice carrying across the city. The march isn't invasion. It's quarantine. The Behemoths are the walls. The echo is the fire outside them. The Rain Prime emerged, flanked by guards. And what gives you the right to decide who lives behind your walls, human? Wren's eyes glowed faintly. You did. The day you thought you could rule without remembering what came before. At that exact moment, the first ripple hit. From beyond the galactic rim, reality itself began to distort. Stars twisting, systems vanishing into silence. The echo had awakened, and the only thing standing between it and the living galaxy were the Behemoths and the humans inside them. Wren turned toward the horizon, where the sky darkened. The march isn't the threat, he said softly. It's the prayer. And as he spoke, the Behemoths raised their heads toward the oncoming storm. One by one, their hearts ignited. Their chests opened, revealing swirling cores of molten light, each a fragment of a weapon older than civilization itself. The march of the steel behemoths had not come to destroy the galaxy. It had come to save it. But salvation, as humanity knew too well, was never free. The first stars began to go out. No explosion, no flare, just silence, sudden, absolute, and terrifying. Across the galaxy, observatories screamed into the void for answers. They received none. The light that had burned for billions of years was being eaten alive. The echo plague had awakened, and the only sound that filled the heavens was the slow, thunderous rhythm of the march of the steel behemoths. Commander Elias Wren stood beneath the shadow of the titanic machine called Vigil Zero, its armor gleaming with rivers of molten data, its legs dug into the bedrock of Tel Rune, anchoring it to the planet like a mountain of purpose. The council guards that surrounded him had long since lowered their weapons. They were staring, not in defiance, but in awe. "This is what you've been keeping from us?" The Rain Prime hissed. His golden carapace reflected the glow of the behemoth's core. "A contagion of reality? You mean to say this thing devours light?" Wren nodded, calm but weary. "Not light, meaning. It feeds on information, thought, and memory. When a civilization reaches a certain threshold of knowledge, it begins to notice us, and then it eats what we know, what we are." The crystalline Aelari ambassador trembled, her luminous body dimming. "But that means—" "Yes," Wren said softly. "It means the more advanced we become, the tastier we are." He turned his gaze upward. The horizon shimmered with strange light, like curtains of distorted time rolling across the sky. The behemoths were built to sing in counter-harmonic frequency. The sound they make, that hum you hear when they march, it stabilizes local space-time, holds the plague back. The Rain Prime's mandibles clicked. "So you expect us to simply hide behind your monsters while your kind plays gods again?" Wren's eyes narrowed. "We expect you to help us hold the line, or die trying." Far beyond Tel Rune, in the cold reaches between stars, the first real battle began. The Echo Plague was not a fleet. It had no ships, no bodies, no faces. It moved like smoke through the seams of reality, erasing whatever it touched. Worlds flickered and vanished. Stations dissolved into whispers of memory. The void filled with ghosts, fragments of communications that repeated the same words in different voices. "We see you. We remember. We hunger." The behemoths formed a wall around the galactic core, thousands of titanic machines linking their energy fields in a lattice of glowing veins. Each step they took echoed through the ether, their harmonics weaving together into a single roaring song that fought the darkness back inch by inch. They didn't fight with guns or missiles. They fought with sound, with will. Every resonance pushed the echo backward, not destroyed but contained. And within each behemoth, human pilots sat in silence, their minds fused to their titanic creations. They felt the universe bend and strain through the feedback. They felt the pain of the stars screaming, and they kept walking. On Tel Rune, Vec had turned the council chamber into a war room. Dozens of holograms flickered in midair, maps, sensor feeds, lost signals. "The containment field is collapsing on 3 fronts," the AI said. "Outer spiral sectors collapsing at 0.2 light-years per hour." "That's half the council colonies," muttered Harshek of the Drethi, his voice low. "We can't save them all!" Wren entered, armor scarred, voice hoarse. "You're right. We can't, but we can save what's left." Vec pivoted toward him. "We've analyzed the pattern. The echo doesn't spread randomly. It follows cognition, the densest concentrations of neural activity." "Populations," Wren murmured. "Cities? Hives? Thought clusters?" "Precisely. Which means if we move the behemoths toward the populated zones, they'll chase us," Wren finished, leaving the rest of the galaxy time to flee. The Rain Prime slammed his claw on the console. "You can't be serious!" "You would lead that thing toward the core worlds?" Wren turned, his expression unreadable. "If we don't, there won't be any worlds." In orbit, the behemoths began to shift formation. The great machines turned as one, their movements synchronized by frequencies too deep for ears to hear. From Tel Run's surface, it looked like the night sky was coming alive, constellations moving, aligning into an impossible geometry that glowed with light older than any sun. And then they moved forward. The march changed tempo. The hum became a hymn, slower, deeper, resonant with purpose. The vibration rippled through every living thing in the system. Children clutched their chests, feeling it in their bones. Pilots on distant ships began to weep without knowing why. It wasn't fear. It was awe. Because in that sound, every soul heard something they couldn't explain. A lullaby of creation, of planets being born, of the first light touching the void. It was the sound of humanity refusing to die. When the Behemoths reached the edge of the galactic core, they stopped. The space ahead of them was wrong, twisted, alive, pulsing with tendrils of living void. The echo was no longer hiding. It had shape now, a massive storm of shimmering nothingness, stretching from star to star. Within it, flickers of ancient civilizations, ghosts of species long devoured, rippled like faint memories in a dying dream. It spoke without words, vibrating through every molecule. You build walls, little makers, but every wall crumbles. Every forge cools. Every song ends. Ren's mind, linked through his neural interface to Vigil Zero, trembled under the psychic pressure. The echo wasn't one voice. It was billions. Every mind it had ever consumed, all screaming in unison. He pushed back, his voice amplified through the Behemoth's core. Then hear our song. And the Behemoths sang. It wasn't melody. It was defiance. The sound tore across the void like thunder made solid, pushing the darkness backward, reshaping the geometry of space. Every note carried the memory of a dying world. Every rhythm the heartbeat of those who had refused to surrender. On Tel Run, the council watched in stunned silence as the star field above their world pulsed with waves of white light. "The containment's holding," Vex said, his voice barely above a whisper. But the Rain Prime knew better. For how long? Vex hesitated. "Until they burn out." Ren's voice came through the comms, steady but tired. "We knew the cost when we built them. But if the Behemoths fall, then the echo will consume us all." There was no argument left. One by one, the Behemoths began to fall, their cores overloaded, their song fading into static. But each time one fell, two more harmonized louder, their resonance amplifying in the final moments. They weren't dying. They were passing the torch. The echo shrieked, its surface boiling, its voices twisting into screams of rage. "You cannot hold us forever." Ren smiled through the pain, his mind fracturing under the strain of channeling an entire star's worth of power. "Forever isn't the point," he whispered. "Just long enough for them to remember." He raised Vigil Zero's arms toward the core. The massive titan glowed brighter than any sun. "Vec," he said over the comms, "when this is done, tell them..." The line cut. The Behemoth's core detonated. The explosion wasn't light. It was sound, pure and infinite. The shock wave rippled across the galaxy, burning away the tendrils of the echo, resetting the quantum fields, purging every infected system. For 7 full minutes, every being in the Milky Way heard the same noise, the heartbeat of the Behemoths, pounding through space and time. Then silence. Perfect, clean, holy silence. When it was over, the Behemoths were gone. No wreckage, no metal. Just footprints, vast impressions in space-time where they had stood. The echo had been driven back beyond the rim, sealed once more in the outer void. Tel Run's skies were clear. The stars shone steady, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy felt alive. Vec hovered over the ruined council chamber, his processors humming softly. The delegates, shell-shocked, stared at the empty sky. "They're gone," whispered the Elari. "The humans. The machines. All of them." Vec's single eye glowed faintly. "Not gone, remembered." He turned toward the balcony, where the dawn light crept over the horizon, and whispered to no one in particular, "The forge sleeps, but the fire remains." Far beyond, at the edge of known space, a faint light flickered. A human hand, scarred, metal and flesh intertwined, reached out of the void, pulling itself onto the surface of a silent, forgotten world. Commander Wren coughed, his body battered but alive. Above him, faint trails of light marked where the Behemoths had fallen. He looked up at the stars and smiled weakly. "They'll remember," he said, and the stars seemed to flicker in agreement. The march had ended. But the legacy of the steel Behemoths had just begun. The galaxy was quiet. For the first time in 1,000 generations, no warships moved through the lanes, no council decrees echoed across the channels, no empire shouted its supremacy into the dark. Silence had fallen, not the silence of death, but the kind left behind when the storm finally passes. Telrune's skies were whole again. The stars no longer screamed. And the sound that once shook the heavens, the march of the steel Behemoths, now lived only in memory. In the great chamber of the rebuilt council, the delegates gathered under a single banner, not of conquest, but of remembrance. The Hrain Prime presided no longer as ruler, but as witness. His golden carapace was dulled now, scarred by the radiation that had scorched Telrune's atmosphere during the war. Beside him floated Vec, its once polished hull marked by burns that would never heal. The council floor, once filled with argument, now glowed faintly with symbols, names written in human letters, etched into crystal. They were the names of the Behemoths, each one called something simple, something achingly human. Atlas, Vigil, Terra's Heart, Dawnkeeper, Steel Sun, 10,000 names, 10,000 sacrifices. The council's voices lowered in reverence. Vec spoke first. "We are gathered not to rebuild but to remember. The humans are gone, and yet their work endures. They saved us, not because they loved us, but because they refused to forget what they once were." He paused, letting his words settle into the still air. "Every civilization here owes its breath to their silence. Let us not fill it with arrogance again." A memorial rose where Vigil Zero had stood, a single piece of its armor, black and gleaming, indestructible, had been found embedded deep within the crust of Telrune. It had survived the detonation, carrying fragments of sound and memory encoded in its molecular lattice. When scientists replayed it, the recordings weren't battle logs or commands, they were voices, simple messages, short human sentences spoken into the void as the Behemoths had marched. "Hold the line. For the ones who couldn't, make the light last." And one, spoken in Commander Wren's voice, faint but unmistakable, "If you can hear this, you made it. Keep building. Don't let the stars grow cold." The council wept. Even the Drethi, who had once called humanity vermin, lowered their heads and struck the floor 3 times with their talons, the old warrior sign of respect for the fallen. Decades passed. Then centuries. The Behemoths became myth, stories told to children who no longer believed the stars could die. But every world that had once trembled beneath their march carried something of them still. On Cathera Prime, the once darkened planet, cities rose again. They built their walls from alloys left behind by the Behemoths, materials that healed themselves under sunlight. On Aelari's crystalline moons, scholars taught the Song of Iron, a resonance technique derived from the Behemoth's harmonics, capable of stabilizing quantum fractures, and on Telrune itself, Vec remained. Centuries old, rusted, but still vigilant. He had sworn to wait until the humans returned. Every dawn he faced the rising light and spoke the same words aloud, though no one else was left to hear. The forge sleeps. The fire remains. Then, one night, the stars changed again. At first, no one noticed, and the movement was too slow, too deliberate. But deep in the archives of Telrune, Vec's dormant sensors flickered awake. He opened his one remaining optic and saw it, a shape. Not vast like the Behemoths, smaller, cruder, but familiar. It moved between the outer systems, alone, carrying the unmistakable energy signature of human engineering. Vec transmitted a signal, old and unpolished, on frequencies no one had used in thousands of years. The reply came seconds later, a voice, human, warm, steady. "This is the vessel Pilgrim. We found your beacon. We're coming home. Vec's processor froze. He played the message again, slower, making sure it wasn't a dream. We're coming home. He broadcast the message to every remaining council world. And as the news spread, ancient cities lit their beacons once more. The old songs of the march filled the air again, sung not as hymns of mourning, but as greetings. The stars brightened. The void no longer felt so empty. 3 months later, the Pilgrim entered Telrune's orbit. The ship was small, more a scarred ark than a warship. Its hull bore the marks of age and travel, but on its bow gleamed a single symbol, one that had not been seen in millennia, a hammer encircled by 12 stars, the insignia of Earth. The docking clamps hissed, the airlocks opened, and from the mist stepped a figure in worn armor, his hair white, his eyes bright as iron. Vec hovered forward, trembling. "Commander, Ren?" The man smiled faintly. Not quite. His echo, maybe. We're what's left of the Forge Line, the last children of the Behemoths. He looked past the AI toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn touched the ruins of the old spire. "Did they remember?" he asked softly. Vec's eye glowed faintly blue. "Every world. Every species. Every child who looks up at the stars knows who kept them burning." The man nodded once. "Then we did it right. The return of the humans was not a conquest. It was quiet, peaceful, purposeful. They didn't rebuild fleets. They rebuilt foundries not for weapons, but for hearts, cores of living metal that sang softly, tuned to the frequencies of the old march. They shared the designs with the galaxy, teaching even the smallest worlds how to keep the echo contained forever. And for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy worked together not out of fear, but out of gratitude. The Covenant of Steel was born, a pact between every living species to uphold the light of creation, to keep the stars from falling silent again. And at its center, as a symbol of unity, they built a monument, a behemoth, not for war, for remembrance, half machine, half cathedral. Its heart was empty, left open to the sky, so that every generation could look inside and see their reflection in its mirrored core. They called it the Last Forge. Years later, when the Pilgrim's crew had grown old, the man who called himself Ren's Echo stood once more before that monument. Children played at its feet. Pilgrims sang beneath its shadow. He placed a hand on its cold steel and whispered, "We kept the fire, old friend." And somewhere deep inside the monument, or perhaps only in his heart, came the faintest, ghostly reply, a hum. The same rhythm that had once shaken the heavens, the same sound that had marched across the stars. Boom, 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 boom! The sound of the Behemoths, the heartbeat of humanity, the pulse of everything that refused to die quietly. As the sun set across Telrune, Vec recorded his final message, his voice soft as the wind that now carried laughter instead of fear. They said humanity ignored every council meeting. They were wrong. Humanity was just listening, waiting for the day the stars would need them again. And when that day came, they didn't send diplomats. They sent mountains that walked. He paused, letting the silence breathe. The march is over, but the light remains. And so the galaxy moved on. The stars hummed softly, alive with the memory of the Behemoth's song. Empires rose again, but now they built with humility. And when children looked up at the night sky, they didn't see endless cold. They saw the path their ancestors once carved in iron and fire. They called it the Road of the Makers, and every traveler who set foot upon it carried one truth in their heart. When the stars grow dark again, humanity will walk, not to conquer, not to rule, but to remind the universe that creation itself still has a pulse.